Friendship is very difficult for us to understand. We have a misplaced sense of importance in it, and it is misunderstood. The value and impact of friendship is truly misunderstood. We abuse friendships and we neglect them, and we give them too much significance in just the very wrong ways. And so I really would like to talk about that. But particularly, I would like to dovetail the subject of friendship with some other elements that are practiced in the philosophy of the Buddhist teaching. And I would like to dovetail them in such a way that perhaps these other elements can be better understood. So in one way, we're talking about something that we're very commonly aware of, because we all have friends, and many of us have best friends, friends that we are particularly close with, or friends with whom we have a long-standing relationship, or friends with whom we have a short relationship, but that relationship seems to be particularly intense at this time. So we all have the sense of an awareness of friendship, and that being so familiar to us, perhaps we can use that as a sort of a steady point, or a way in which we can reflect and deepen our understanding of two other subjects that are very important in the Buddhist teachings. And those two subjects are compassion and devotion. Now, in order to think about our friendships, let's really honestly, and I want to underline the word honestly, that is to say, you should be honest with yourself. Honestly examine the important friendships in your life, those friendships that are powerful to you in whatever way, and they needn't be long-term, they needn't be having one form or another, but what are those friendships that are or have been extremely potent, have been powerful in your life, or perhaps those relationships that have been catalysts. There are many different kinds of relationships. There are relationships that seem to go on and on. I in fact, for many years had a friend that I felt close with in a particular way. It was as though philosophically we didn't really understand each other. We never really talked about things like that. But there were some emotional elements of our nature, some psychological elements of our nature that we could agree upon, and were very sympathetic with one another. And these elements of our nature were so sympathetic that even if we didn't see each other for a couple of years, we could see each other again and immediately fall into place. Kind of like two pegs in a hole, you know, that kind of thing. And then I know that people have reported having friendships that were extremely intense during a particular time of some turmoil. For instance, I've heard of friends that have been to the Vietnam War and have survived and have come back. That during that time they developed intense, incredibly intimate relationships with other people who were also in the war, with other men, who were experiencing some of the same things that they were. And then when the war was over, they had no way of communicating what they'd been through to other people, to people who had not been in the war. And so that friendship took on a particular potency and deep meaning for them. They were never able to accomplish that same kind of bond with any other person. We've had friendships like that, haven't we? Or perhaps you've gone, I know I've talked to people who have gone through, say, divorces, or one kind of particularly difficult period or another, where they bonded with a certain person who saw them through it. And then when it was over, it seemed as though the friendship had lost its potency and was almost over. So these kinds of interesting things have happened with friendships. For others of us, perhaps the friendships are just, they have a more almost stable or even bland flavor to them. They seem more mundane. Our friendships are the ones that we can always depend on to borrow a cup of sugar from, or we can always just talk to, or we can just keep in touch with, and they are comforting. They provide a kind of structure in our lives, a structure that is the basis for some of our experience of continuum. So there are many different kinds of friendship that we have within our lives. Now here's the honest part. First of all, we've identified some of the different kinds of friendships that we might have. But here's the part that's difficult. Here's the honest part. Why do you have that friend? What's the motivation for having such a friend? Think about the friend that you had when you were going through some sort of turmoil or change. Haven't you had a friendship like that? That during a particularly strong period of change where you felt vulnerable or unsafe? When things were too chaotic? During that time, perhaps you had a friend, and do you remember the intensity of the clinging to that friendship? Do you remember how strong that felt? If you've ever had a friendship like that, there was a need there, a very powerful, potent, and driving need. Do you remember the clinging to that friendship? And if the opposite were true, if you had a friend that was going through a particularly potent period of turmoil, and you were there for them, really there for them in a solid way, you kept up with them, really were close to them, do you remember, if you're perfectly honest, how you clung to that feeling of potency and competency, even though you were the giver, not the receiver? Do you remember that feeling? Do you remember how good it felt to have that sense of being in charge, to have that sense of control, to have that sense of being able to give something that you didn't know you could give, to be able to invest in that way? Do you remember the intensity of that feeling of longing? Do you remember having a friend that you just felt that you had a particular kind of sharing with, that sharing was particularly potent for you, that you could go through many things and that friend would kind of sound the one note that was consistent in your life? If you've had a friend like that, you remember how potent and how strong that kind of relationship has been, and how you needed that, how amazing that was for you, how kind that was to you. You remember those feelings. What are some of the reasons that we have friends? We have friends because we need them. Our friends support us. They maintain a sense of continuum in our lives. They give us a certain kind of structure. They reflect us. They help us to define ourselves. Our friends have a certain kind of capability in which we can constantly, well, why are they our friends? Because they understand us. What does that mean? They give us a format by which we can understand ourselves. In some ways, they are mirrors. Our friends are a structure that we create as a way to define and really hold on to self-nature. Our friends serve a definite function in that way. Sometimes our friends can give us strength. Sometimes they can help us relax. Sometimes our friends make us feel good about ourselves. Generally, we pick friends that are complimentary toward us. Rarely do we pick friends that are extremely critical toward us, although that does happen, and sometimes that happens almost as an opposite way of our defining ourselves. In that sometimes if we have a friend that is extremely critical toward us, we can come away with a good feeling of being strong enough to be able to accept that criticism and still come out a winner. You know, so sometimes we have that kind of thing going on. Or sometimes we can listen to the criticism and we can say, I don't agree, and thereby define ourselves. But once more, if we really think about our friendships, they're really all about us. When I ask the children, what have you done for your friend? I ask that hoping that at the same time perhaps you would ask yourself that question. Did you think to do that? What have you done for your friend? Now you might be able to come up with some of the answers that the children have come up with. For instance, I gave my friend some clothing, or I gave my friend a present, or I was there for my friend when my friend needed some help, or I babysat for my friend when my friend wanted to go to the opera, or something like that. Whatever thing it is, it may be something way out in left field, or it may be something consistent and long-standing. If we really examine the extent of our loving kindness and our compassion within the context of that relationship, we may actually find out, in fact I know that we will find out, that ultimately it is about defining ourselves. That friendship is about defining us. The Buddha teaches us that that's how it is in cyclic existence. That cyclic existence is a circular function. That it is actually interdependently arising cause and effect relationships that play themselves out at different rates and in different patterns. Some so profoundly intricate that they are almost unrecognizable. That they are unrecognizable. Particularly if we think that the cause and effect relationships that we are involved in right now did not begin at the time of our birth. But according to the Buddha's teaching, we have been involved in cyclic existence. We have been involved in creating cause and effect relationships since time out of mind, since the first idea of self-nature as being inherently real. That we, as sentient beings, have been involved in cyclic existence since time out of mind, inconceivable time past. And so sometimes the causes that we see ripen into effect in our present lifetime began a long time ago, and there's no way we can make a pattern out of that. We have no memory. We have no recognition. It is not possible for us to make a pattern out of that. But the Buddha teaches us that the nature of cyclic existence is circular, cyclic. It will continually ripen in interdependently arising cause and effect relationships that knit together like a tapestry. And we cannot make out the pattern. One of the main faults of cyclic existence is that we do not understand the causes that have brought about the events that we now experience. Many of them happened before our time. That's the we that we consider us, the present personality that we are. It began a long time ago, and so we can't see it. Therefore, we do not know how to break the pattern if we don't like the pattern. We don't know how to change things. The Buddha teaches us that all sentient beings have one thing in common. They all wish to be happy. All sentient beings equally wish to be happy. But they do not know how to create the causes of happiness because they haven't learned from the cause and effect relationships that they have seen. They do not understand the patterns. All sentient beings wish to be happy, and yet we are involved in this constant, interdependently arising series of cyclic cause and effect, cause and result ripenings. That is the content of our experience. And within our friendships, that is also the content of our friendships. If our friends are kind to us, if our particular good friend is kind to us, you can be certain that that is not an accident. You can be certain that in the past we have been kind to our friend, that we have created the merit by which to experience that kindness. Conversely, if that friend is unkind to us and there seems to be no reason for it, why does the friend get mad at us? Why does the friend consistently leave us to our own resources? Why does that friend not come through for us? Why does that friend betray us? Why does that friend do that when we love that friend so well? Want that friend so much? Why does that happen? You can be sure that you are not a victim in that circumstance. It didn't happen by accident. It happened because in the past, you were the betrayer. You were the abandoner. You were the one that was not so kind. But not realizing that, we continually cling to the friendship in the way that if we were adrift in an ocean, we would cling to something that were floating. We just cling to what we see. You see what I'm saying? The circumstance is all that makes sense to us. We don't think, oh, my friend is not being kind to me. My friend is not taking care of me. My friend is not honoring this relationship. So therefore, I must double time, in some extraordinary way, love that friend. I must honor that relationship. I must put in more time. I must be even kinder. I must purify the karma that is ripening here. how often we forget to take the view that in any circumstance, our main job is to love. How little we remember that, and how much we think about our own comfort and safety and our own experience. What am I getting? How this challenges me. This is so hard on me. Blah, 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 blah. And how little we can remember that here's another opportunity to give love. I know a wonderful story about a woman who first entered into Buddhism. She didn't know anything about Buddhism. In fact, she didn't know anything about any of that metaphysical stuff. But she somehow ended up in this Buddhist temple and wanted to learn some meditation. And she was having some trouble with her husband. And she had some real complaints about her husband. So she went to see the monk who was the leader of this temple. It was a Theravadan Buddhist temple, not this temple. So she went to see the monk who was the head of this temple. And the monk was sort of a smiley guy, you know, one of those peaceful Buddhist types. And he just sort of sat there in his position, you know, looking like monks do. Some of them. Anyway, he was sitting there in his peaceful position, and she said, well, my husband does this, and he doesn't acknowledge me for this, and he doesn't give me the power in this relationship, and he doesn't acknowledge me, and I'm having such a hard time, and blah, 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 blah. You know the rap, don't you? Yada, 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 yada. How many times have you sung the song? Infinite, right? So here we are singing the litany of samsara. And the monk is listening with his wonderful smile. And the woman begins to wonder if the monk is deaf, because he's not reacting to anything that the woman is saying. But, you know, he doesn't acknowledge me. He doesn't ever give me any credit for what I'm doing. And I feel so unloved. And he makes me so angry when he doesn't uphold his part of the bargain. And there's a fairness about it, isn't there? I mean, isn't there a fairness? Like, if you do your part, isn't that person supposed to do their part? How many of you have heard this psychological rap before? The litany of samsara, isn't it? So anyway, she was singing this song and really beginning to wonder if she should go, you know, in front of the monk's face, like, maybe he died. And we don't know yet, or he's ascended into the higher spheres or something. And so she finished singing her song, realizing that she wasn't getting a rise out of him. And she just stood there and she said, now, what do you think about that? And the monk said, well, the important question is, can you still love? And she said, well, but you didn't hear what I said. Da-da, 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 da-da. And she went on trying to sing the song. And he said, yes, but can you still love? The only important question there, can you still love? Your question is not what someone else does. Can you still love? It's the only thing you have power to change. It's the only thing that will change what is happening between you and that other person. It is the question, you see? You cannot dictate to that person how to change their activity. This is karma ripening. You have the power, however, to change the course of your life. And the key to that, the jewel that you'll hold in your hand, is that very question. Can you still love? How do we understand the context of that loving? How do we make that happen? Now, some people make the mistake that loving looks like pure lunacy, looks like what I call idiot compassion. That loving kindness within the context of relationships looks a lot like, oh, I should always smile at you and look like a pope or something, you know? That I should always, wait, hold on now, let me get my spiritual demeanor together here. Like that, you know, that we should always be smiling like that. We should always be kindly like that. We should always speak softly and look ever skyward. And that is what our loving kindness should be like. That we should never argue with people and we should be polite and blah, blah, blah. People have so many different ideas, don't we? About what that kindness should look like. What we generally try to do when we're being kind is we act. We are marvelous actors and actresses. I really don't see how it is that all sentient beings are able to get a career on stage, because Our whole lives have been spent acting in that regard. We decide that we know how compassion looks like, we decide we know what kindness looks like, and we just sort of put on that mask, and we think that that's really what it's all about. Or sometimes we think that the kind of kindness that you should demonstrate is the kind of kindness that is what I call nice guy phenomena. You know, nice guy phenomena means that under every circumstance, you're supposed to be lovable, pleasing, and a nice guy. That's not kindness. That has nothing to do with kindness. That has to do with you wanting to be lovable, pleasing, and a nice guy, or gal. Then there's idiot compassion. Idiot compassion looks a lot like, no matter what a person says, whether they are acting like a complete turkey or whether they are making real sense, you react toward them with the same kind of kindly smile. That you never take a person who is really making a lot of mistakes by the hand and say, "Look, sweetheart, this isn't working for you. Let's try something else. Let's get on another path here. Let's do this a little bit differently." We have this sense of idiot compassion being an act that we perform. In order to really understand how one should be compassionate in a relationship, we really have to understand the basis for compassion, and the only way that can be done is to understand the basis for suffering. If we do not face, finally, and understand the basis for suffering, we don't have the tools by which to practice compassion. We will only act. Do you see the fallacy of that acting? It does no good. It doesn't create any auspicious karma. It doesn't gather together any merit, and it solves no problems. All it does is help you to continue to act the way you're doing. You just act. It's always an act. You're always on stage. So, in order to understand how to engage in compassionate activity within the context of relationship, you must understand what suffering actually is. Let's think now about the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha teaches us that all sentient beings are suffering. That's a hard lesson to learn right in itself, isn't it? Because we have so limited, I should say, understanding of what sentient beings are all about that we take everything, being superficial as we are, at face value. If we see someone rich, we think they're not suffering like us because I'm poor. If we see somebody beautiful, we think they're not suffering like me because I'm ugly. If we see somebody that has a wonderful personality, we think they're not suffering like me because I'm very hesitant in my speech. If we see someone that has a particular skill or talent or is very competent in some way, we think that person is not suffering like me because I can't do anything. Conversely, if we see somebody that's very poor, we think, oh, that person is really suffering because they're not as wealthy as I am. Or if we see somebody that's extremely ugly or deformed, we think that person is suffering because they're not as beautiful as I am. And so it happens in that way. What we forget constantly by measuring things with our five senses is that all sentient beings across the board are suffering. The rich, beautiful, famous, competent ones are also suffering. But we do not understand their suffering because we can't see it. It looks pretty darn good from where we sit. They are suffering from the same things that all human beings are suffering from. They are suffering from old age, sickness, and death. And if they are not old, sick, or dead at the moment, it will be just a hop, skip, and a jump before they are. Believe me. It is described in the Buddhist teaching that human life is like water falling down a mountain. It appears to be a continuum because we see this waterfall. But the water that started at the top of the mountain is down very quickly. And that's the speed, the rate at which our lives move. Those of us that have reached maybe the age of 40, 50, 60, we know that, don't we? We know how quickly this has gone, and we know how quickly 5 years seems to go now. It's an amazingly short period of time, and when you think that you have such a limited time to spend, it goes very quickly. On top of that, the Buddha teaches us that all sentient beings, no matter what life form they are, whether they be animals or whether they be God beings even, whether they be hungry ghosts, whether they be hellish beings, whether they be any of the beings in the 6 realms of cyclic existence, the Buddha teaches us that all sentient beings have a suffering, and that suffering is caused at the root by desire. That all of us are propelled by desire. We constantly cling to self-nature as being inherently real, and we cling to the need to constantly define self-nature. We cling to our environment. We cling to being. We cling to having. We cling to everything. I mean, you know yourself that, you're constantly trying to get something materialistic, or get something non-materialistic, or get something very subtle, or get something very gross, but there's a constant moving toward getting something. And even in our minds, we constantly move toward a certain mind state and constantly stretch. There's always this moving to get. At the bottom line, at the trunk of that is desire. And the Buddha teaches us that all sentient beings suffer from desire. That we can never completely have what we want, because the moment we have something that we previously wanted, having the habit of desire, we only conceive of something else that we want. We are never for very long content. Contentment is not in cyclic existence. There is simply no contentment. The moment we have something, we want something else, or that something isn't perfect, or it should change, or it ends, or it rusts, or it dies. That is the nature of cyclic existence, and all sentient beings are suffering from that. And in order to understand the suffering, the way to be compassionate within a relationship, we must not only understand what suffering is and how it actually takes place and what are the causes. We must understand that according to the Buddha, we are taught that there is an end to suffering, but that we constantly mistake the end of suffering, don't we? How many times have you tried to end your suffering? In so many different ways. We try to end our suffering by getting that car, or we try to end our suffering by having enough, or we try to end our suffering by getting that man, or we try to end that suffering by getting that woman, or we try to end our suffering by having those children, and that white picket fence, and that better job, and that promotion, and that good result, and that approval. Don't we always try to end our suffering by getting that approval? Don't we always try to get our suffering by creating something? And then what happens when you create something? You have to create something else, don't you? It never ends, does it? It just never ends. So we're always trying to end our suffering, but do we ever follow the Buddha's advice? The Buddha says, in fact, that there is an end to suffering. That end to suffering is never accomplished by by meeting the need of our desire. Did you know that? Fulfilling our desire will never end the suffering. Never. It only increases the habit of fulfilling our desire. The Buddha teaches us that the end of suffering is the pacification of desire. The pacification of desire. The ending of the habit, the very habit of desire. That's easier said than done, isn't it? Much easier said than done. And the reason why that's easier said than done is because we've been engaged in this habit since time out of mind. Logically, it should take another time out of mind, however long that is, to solve this problem. But of course, if one were to truly practice, and to practice well, if one were to truly accomplish one's practice, then one would be able to end desire. One would be able to really concentrate, and the Buddha teaches us that there are many methods, technologies that we can apply that speed up the process of practicing the pacification of desire. One, for instance, is generosity. Another, of course, is through the accumulation of merit. That if one has a meritorious mind, filled with merit, and much habit of merit, the the habit of desire and self-absorption will be pacified. Within the context of a relationship, what do our relationships do for us, our friendships? Do we utilize our friendships as a way to solve the problem of cyclic existence? Do we? Almost never. Almost never. No, we encourage dependency on our friendships. We encourage our friends to try to meet our needs. We encourage that kind of interaction that can have no good result. We constantly encourage the habit of need. And in the same way, we constantly encourage our friends to depend on us, to rely on us. And we constantly want to be their solution because it makes us feel good, you know? Parents love to do that with their children, don't they? Don't you as parents, don't you love to do that with your child? Don't you love to solve your child's problem? Doesn't it make you feel good about yourself as a parent? That's true. But in a friendship, in a relationship, that cannot bring any good result. If we were to really view our relationships as the precious things that they are, we would understand that our friendships could be an arena in which we practice. We can practice true generosity. For instance, if we wanted to be kind to our friends, let's think like this, rather than, you know, let our friends depend on us in some way that they feel that they have problems that can be solved by us, and they need us, like that. Let's examine your friend's suffering. What is your friend suffering from? Is your friend really suffering because they're lonely? Well, in a way, but it's not what it seems to be. Your friend is lonely because they have the habit of loneliness. Your friend is lonely because in the past they have been unkind to others. So perhaps the best way for you to serve your friend is gently and gradually, over a period of time, teach your friend, perhaps by example, how to be kind, how to love. Gradually, slowly, through demonstration, how to love. You see? Or you can teach the friend about generosity. You can encourage the friend not to be so self-absorbed. You can encourage your friend in some gentle way, and it has to be skillful. How to manage kindness. Because if you understand your friend's need, that is the solution. That is the solution. And within the context of the friendship, you can also practice. You can think, by looking at your friend, I know I want my friend's approval now. I know I want my friend to give me what they have. I know I want my friend to honor me. I know I want my friend to pay attention to me. I know I want my friend to heal when I want them to heal. I want all these things. I want the excitement of the friendship. I want the romance of the friendship. I want the juice. Give me the juice. And yet you can use that way to understand that you are not suffering from a lack of any of these things. You are suffering from a habit of desire, of neediness. And you can practice within the context of the relationship, the pacification of that need. Friendships can be valuable and potent props on the spiritual path that we can all utilize. But we must understand the causes of suffering, and we must understand the end of suffering. Now let's jump to another subject just quickly. Let's jump to the subject of devotion. Devotion on the Vajrayana path is extremely important. The Guru is held as the highest. In some ways, the Guru is actually held above the Buddha. Isn't that odd? The Guru is held above the Buddha for this reason. We are a practical people. That's one thing you'll learn about Buddhists. We are extremely practical. And we understand this, that the Buddha is the source. The Buddha is the mind of enlightenment. The Buddha is the very mind by which the Dharma, which is the path, appeared. It is by the Buddha's extension of compassion, compassionate activity, that everything that you see here has actually appeared. This is due to the Buddha's kindness. No way that this temple could have appeared, or anything that you're hearing could have appeared, if it were not for the Buddha's kindness. Yet, the voice, the focal point, the actual appearance in the world now is the Guru. The one that is speaking, that administers the path, that gives the path, the one that is actually the instrument by which the music is sounded, is the Guru. The music would be silent without the instrument, you see. And so from the Vajrayana point of view, the Lama is considered to be representative of and containing the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. From the Vajrayana point of view, the Lama or the Guru is considered to be the only meaningful friendship. Define meaningful. Now here's the difficult part, because you may have a friend, and I'm sure you do have a friend, that gives you lots of warm fuzzies. And your Lama may not spend any time with you at all. And you may have a friend that you can always go and have dinner with, that you just feel so comfortable with, that will be there for you and that will share time with you and make you feel stronger and blah, blah, blah. You know, all that stuff. And your Lama may not really have that much time with you. Your Lama may not be able to be with you in that kind of ordinary friendship mode. How is it then that that friendship with the Lama is so much more meaningful? Because the basis for this philosophical thinking is that we are basing that on the understanding of what your needs are. And to understand what your needs are, you must understand what you are suffering from. You are not suffering from what you think you're suffering from. You are not suffering because you don't have what you need. You are suffering because you have the habit of needing. That's the suffering. You have the habit of needing. Your friend, no matter how hard they try, cannot solve your problem. They'll never be able to meet all your needs. You know that doesn't happen. It never happens. It can't happen. And your friend cannot teach you how not to need, cannot point out to you the fallacy of needing, cannot help you to solve the problems of the habitual tendencies of your mind. Now the Lama ultimately will be able to meet all your needs. Even if they don't spend that much time with you in an ordinary way, giving you your temporary needs, the Lama will be able to give to you your ultimate need. Because your ultimate need is to awaken to a state which is beyond suffering. That is your ultimate need. And the Lama or the Guru is able to provide that by solving your immediate need. And your immediate need is that you need to pacify the habit that you have been engaged in since time out of mind, of desire, of grasping, of clinging. That is your immediate need. That is what you must do in order to be happy. There is no happiness without that. There is no mental stability. There is only an existence that is pervaded with suffering, the constant suffering of never having your needs met. That is the nature of cyclic existence. It never meets your needs. Never. Temporarily, sure. And the deadly part about it is that sometimes when you're really in a high spot, you know, you've got that man or you've got that woman, got some money, got your car, things are going pretty good. Suddenly you think, yeah, I can live with this. But you forgot that 10 years ago you weren't living with it. And you forget again that 10 years from now you probably won't be living with it either. And certainly 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, you won't be living at all. So that loss, that disappointment, is part of cyclic existence. As your best friend, the Guru provides a method by which you can eliminate the causes of revolving helplessly in a realm of existence that is pervaded with suffering. By pacifying desire, we eliminate the cause and effect relationships that bring about suffering. And so ultimately, one's teacher, one's guru, is one's best friend from the point of view of being really meaningful. Really meaningful. That is the friend upon which you can rely. That is the friend who has the result that you require. Probably you won't find any idiot compassion there. Generally, the guru will not waste time giving you warm fuzzies or feel-good stuff if it does not serve the purpose of bringing you closer to realization. But on one thing you can depend, that the only motivation in that friendship is the end of your suffering. Otherwise, there is no basis for the friendship between yourself and your guru. That is the only motivation. Can you say that about ordinary relationships? There isn't one relationship or friendship that you have in your life that is completely dedicated to the end of your suffering, and you know it. So, from that point of view, this relationship becomes meaningful. If we understand human friendship as opposed to and as distinguishable from that kind of pristine spiritual friendship, we can understand better what it is that we do in ordinary relationships, and perhaps we can train ourselves to use even our ordinary friendships in a purer way. Certainly, we can better understand the elements of both compassion and devotion. Devotion to one's teacher, devotion to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And in terms of compassion, understanding the only meaningful compassion, that is to say, the compassionate activity that truly solves the problem of samsara, of cyclic existence. We can understand those two things much better by understanding the faults of our ordinary experience within the context of friendships. You should do that. You should examine the relationships that you've had. For most of them, can't you say, where are they now? Think about them. For some of them that you still have, can't you ask yourself, where are they going next? Examine these relationships. And examine your need and the need of sentient beings. Ask yourself, how will you get to the point at which your problem is solved? And that point will be when all desire is pacified and when you awaken to your true nature, to the primordial wisdom state. That is the accomplishment that is meaningful for human beings and for all sentient beings. Now we must determine for ourselves how to be a friend and how to gain for ourselves that precious friendship which will be instrumental in that awakening.
Blessed